This lecture deals with Chapter 7, and we will talk about classroom assessment. In classroom assessment, it's a very important part of learning and teaching, and there's a lot of different types of activities that can be considered assessment, but our main purpose of using assessment is to enhance our student learning. It provides feedback to our students. It helps us make informed decisions about our students and their learning and their progress. And then it helps give us an idea of what exactly we need to do to help them understand aspects that are just not clear for them in the learning process. Now, we have a lot of different types of terms that are important to understand with assessment, and I'm going to do just a brief overview of these. You can look more specifically in the chapter to read about them in depth, but these are just some broad aspects of these terms. So assessment in a real general sense is when teachers are gathering information about student learning. And this can include paper pencil type test. It can be observations of seeing your students do something, talk about something, conduct a certain experiment, something of that nature. It can be performance related, or it can even include projects. So an actual test is a very particular type of assessment. It's usually a set of questions, and the student has to answer those questions in a particular time period. That doesn't mean that the test always has to be timed, but usually we do it in a specific time range. And our students usually do the test in a similar situation that they would to demonstrate their learning. And we look at this to see how well they do. We compare to other students' performance, and we're looking at how they do on a specific set of tasks. Measurement assigns numbers to assessment results. So this is a very quantitative description, and it measures the concept usually with some type of scale. Norm reference standardized tests. One example would be the SAT. Another is the Iowa test. And this is usually a paper pencil type of test. It's been developed by a test publisher. It's been standardized for a large population. It's gone through a norming group. And these tests are administered under the same conditions to everyone. So there's time limits, there's particulars that the test administrators must follow so that everyone has a similar condition set up for taking the test. And the purpose of this is to rank each person's score by comparing it with the scores of the norming group. So keep that in mind. It is comparing an individual's scores with the norming group's scores. Now we have our last two terms to talk about, validity and reliability. And validity refers to the degree that a test measures what it's intended to measure. Okay, so does the test measure what it's supposed to? And reliability refers to the consistency of the test results. So, are the test results consistent? So once we have an idea of how we're going to test and we want to have some level of assessment, we begin to think about what our purpose is. What's the purpose for doing this? And there are four major ways to accomplish some particular purposes. So some of those purposes are going to include these four here: placement, diagnosis, formative assessment, and summative assessment. So placement, there oftentimes you use a pretest, and that pretest is just used for placement of understanding where your students are. And it also can be used to assess a general level of students' prior knowledge that helps you when you begin to build your instruction. Diagnosis, this can be used with a diagnostic test, and that's usually a commercial product. You can get it through a textbook or a publisher, and its whole purpose is to let you know your students' strengths and weaknesses. And these diagnostic tests are used oftentimes with particular specialists, so languages, special ed, that type of thing. Oftentimes they're done to screen for areas of problems. A formative assessment is the most important kind of assessment that you'll use in the classroom, and it's an ongoing assessment. It monitors student progress. The purpose is basically to verify that learning's occurring and that the curriculum content is appropriate to that learner. And then the second part of it is to provide feedback for students. So it's really important part is to give feedback to students and answer, how are they doing? Are they meeting their expectations? And give them some idea of where they are. Summative assessment is really an overview, and it's an overview of previous learning. So the teacher collects information about the students over a time period, and then with an end of quarter, end of semester test or some kind of project, they're tested. So the real purpose of this summative assessment is to have some kind of completion. It's almost a capstone, and it helps you understand how students did over the course of learning. So now that we have the purposes, keep in mind that there are some areas that teachers do need to assess, and those particular areas are listed there. Summative assessments also include grades. Keep that in mind, and that goes into these areas that we assess. But we want to assess their knowledge, their concept learning, their skills, and that can be a wide range of skills: physical learning, social, and so on. And then that also includes attitudes. So how do they work with others, their ability to interact. This can be done through anecdotal records, checklists, etc. Now, ideally, when we plan assessment, it should be a real important part of our instructional plan. So we understand why we are going to teach certain things in a certain order or to a certain degree, because we already have an idea of how that particular concept is going to be assessed. So we build assessment into our instructional planning. That's really important in order to understand. We teach what we test, and we test what we teach. That's very, very important. We have some different assessment strategies that we use when we're doing formative classroom assessment. So one of those things is to give feedback, and feedback is really particularly important because it helps the student understand that gap between what they currently know and what the teacher's expectation of what they want them to know is. And then we can also have peer assessment and then questioning. So relating to students and helping them understand and work through different types of questions. Now, peer assessment is where they can be able to do self-assessment. They can, oftentimes students are more receptive to their peers' feedback in helping them understand how they can do a little better in certain tasks. So providing really clear feedback to students about their achievement typically improves their motivation. It gives them a clear understanding of where their gaps are, how they can move forward, and it moves this kind of murky understanding of why am I not doing well in this class? Why am I not doing well on tests? Why do I not understand what's happening in class? When we get that feedback, then it begins to clear that murkiness up. And when that happens, then that improves student motivation. Students are going to want to learn. So formative assessment typically helps low achievers. It helps them understand kind of the rules for assessment and how that works. Now, there is a relationship between formative and summative assessment. Remember, summative assessment is basically summing up achievement, and formative and summative assessments are both part of the school experience and helps students understand how to meet expectations for learning. So we have different tools. We have, and they're listed here, we have different ways to assess students and different ways to design those assessments. We can construct a particular classroom assessments, and when we do that, we want to determine some particulars. How are we going to grade that? How are we going to set up an activity? What are our test items that we're going to develop? And then we have different types of test questions. So there's essay questions, or also there's more objective test questions. And short answer or open-ended response can move into essay. There's sometimes short answer where it is very objective and you know exactly how it should be answered. But to have a variety of all of these is really what makes a stronger test. And here's some just different samples of different formats of questions that can be asked. This is a true-false one. Here's a sample for matching, where you have different columns and you match one concept to the term or the name. Here is a completion type question. Some multiple choice. And then essay. And again, it can include open-ended response that maybe is not as long as an essay, but it still has that same feel for that. So when we use different products to build into assessment, here's some different aspects of what we can use: checklists, rubrics, rating scales, observations. What's important is that we want to have a variety of these and we want to employ them all at different times. We really can't have too much data. So we are wanting to constantly collect data about our students so we can give them feedback and we can show them where they're doing well, where their strengths lie, and then where the gap is. And we can help them close that gap in their learning.